Hello everyone! About 2 months ago, I uploaded an episode of Random F1 Race Reviews where I covered the 2002 Monaco Grand Prix, but barely any of you saw it before it was smacked by the FOM's relentless banhammer. Everybody boo now. Luckily, that video is still available to be seen on Dailymotion, but in order to bring my YouTube channel some Monaco action, I am today going to be looking at the 1991 Monaco Grand Prix. The favourite coming into this race was undoubtedly Ayrton Senna, who had won 3 out of 3 races so far in 91 and was also a 3-time Monaco Grand Prix winner by this stage in his career. He was in a class of his own, with everyone else fighting to be second best. Sure enough, it was Senna who lined up first on the grid after taking a dominant pole position, almost half a second faster than anyone else. Stefano Modena impressed by putting his car second on the grid, ahead of Patrese and Piquet. Senna's McLaren teammate Gerhard Berger could only manage 6th in qualifying, ahead of Alain Prost's Ferrari. Gabriele Tarquini did extremely well to qualify, which would turn out to be the last time an AGS car would start a Grand Prix, and the final grid slot was taken up by a young Mika Hakkinen in the struggling Lotus. Seeing as this was the early 90s, a whole bunch of cars failed to qualify for the race, including Martin Brundle, who missed the weighbridge and was instantly excluded, and Alex Cathy, who suffered this car-splitting shunt but walked away. When the race got underway, the field fanned out and worked their way towards turn 1. There we had the first issue of the race as Gerhard Berger went straight on and picked up a little bit of damage to the underside of his car. Then Piquet went straight on at Mirabeau and was out of the race with a suspension failure, which may have been as a result of contact, but it's impossible to tell, so he's not going on the crunch count. Luckily, there was no repeat of this pile-up, which occurred in 1990, so the race continued. The order at the end of the first lap was Senna, Modena, Patrese, Mansell and Prost. Shortly after the start, Modena had a big twitch into Portier and was lucky to get away with not binning it Senna 88 style, and even luckier to maintain second place as Patrese pushed him hard. Meanwhile, Senna was just biding his time. He wasn't getting away from the pack, but he knew he didn't really need to. After all, it's not as if anyone can pass Senna at Monaco, just ask Nigel Mansell. Ayrton absolutely had the potential to go faster than this, but while everyone was behind him, he decided to save the gearbox, engine and tyres. Here's Senna then, leading away, minding his own business. What the heck? That is unbelievable! That could easily have been a Tom Price situation right there. I mean, marshals have been required to wait for an all-clear signal before entering the circuit since at least the 70s, so I literally have no idea how that could have happened. That is insane! And there's a problem for the other McLaren. On lap 10, Berger added himself to the crunch count for the second time, this time ending his disastrous race on the spot. I don't know how it happened, as there was no replay, but I can only assume that Monaco's barriers had beef with Berger. With Piquet out, Roberto Moreno became the only Benetton driver still in the race. This was of course the part of the season where he actually raced for Benetton, and before his straight swap with Michael Schumacher took him to Jordan and then later Minardi. Monaco was a good track for Roberto, all things considered, as he managed to qualify both the Coloni in 1989 and the Andrea Murda in 1992, 2 cars which had no right being on the F1 grid. At this point in the race he ran 8th, 2 places behind the points. Now make that 7th, out goes to Cesaris, now that's a familiar sight. Also out of the race by this point was Ivan Capelli, and sadly Gabriele Tarquini was forced to park his AGS, effectively ending the team's short and unsuccessful time in F1. The next crash came courtesy of Aguri Suzuki, who had a minor brake failure coming into Saint Devote. This was actually his second crash of the weekend, as he'd been into the wall at Casino Square during practice. Still 1 shunt away from Jolyon Palmer's record of 3 crashes in one Monaco weekend though. Back to the front runners, that's Prost in 4th now ahead of Mansell in 5th. The TV cameras failed to pick up the move despite Monaco being the shortest track on the calendar and the hardest to overtake on, so that sucks. Mansell seemed to be losing time quite quickly too, as Prost got away from him. On lap 36, Nakajima went out in a very awkward position, initially looking like he'd hit the inside wall, but actually he just had a half spin and then stalled it. He was lucky not to hold up his teammate Modena, who was right behind him and still running second. Also fun fact, apparently it was Stefano's birthday. Oh, that was close with Pirro there. Come on Emanuele, that's no way to treat the birthday boy. He's still there a lap later, look. Oh, fighting with one of the Minardis. This is exactly why we have blue flag rules nowadays. Seriously, does he even know he's not fighting Modena for position? Martini's seen the blue flags look, but Pirro's defending into hairpins. I know you didn't technically have to move over for the blue flags for a few more years after this, but this is outrageous even so. Flipping finally, but look how close Patrese got. Those two had been separated by about 10 seconds. Disaster! No! Stefano Modena's engine gave way Damon Hill style on the exit of the tunnel, and he was out of the race after a superb effort. This would have been just his second podium in F1, and surely the greatest drive in his F1 career. And that's Patrese! He was going to take second place, but spun off on the oil dropped by Modena's car and hit the wall. It was chaos in the podium places, and through went Prost and Mansell. Also out there was Michele Alboreto, who did well even to start this race, as he was nursing 2 broken ribs from a crash in Imola. And speaking of crashing, off went Marc Blundell right behind Modena and Patrese. Amazingly, the race continued uninterrupted despite the obvious danger. Look Mum, I'm beating Senna! I'm beating Senna! Oh, blue flags. In the latter stages of the race, Mansell found that his engine gremlins from earlier had left him, and he found himself catching Prost hand over fist until he was right behind the Ferrari driver. But because this is Monaco, he found that passing was a whole other thing entirely. It's ironic that Nigel would find himself in exactly the same position a year later, but for the win with Senna. It's very reminiscent indeed. On lap 63, Mansell made his move down the inside into the chicane, and he got it! Great move! When I saw this, I have to say I honestly could barely believe it. No one passes the great Alain Prost at Monaco. No one but Mansell, clearly. There may have been a reason for that though, as a few laps later Prost was in the pits replacing a tyre with a slow puncture. He continued on in the race but dropped down to 5th and a lap down, giving 3rd place to the other Ferrari of Alesi.
And it was a bungled, muffed tyre change, of which the Ferrari team cannot be at all proud.
Well, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? A little update on retirements, that's Mika Häkkinen's Smoky Lotus, and also out by this point were Mauricio Gugelmin's Leighton House and Gianni Morbidelli's Minardi. Gianni's teammate Pierluigi Martini had also by this point picked up the unfortunate distinction of being the first driver in F1 history to pick up a 10-second stop-go penalty, which he got for dangerously blocking faster cars. I have no idea why Emanuele Pirro didn't also get this penalty, but oh well. Up into 4th place with Prost's misfortunes was Roberto Moreno, who cheekily unlapped himself to Senna in the tunnel. At this point, Senna was practically dawdling home, losing almost 20 seconds to Mansell behind him. He could afford to do this, of course, because he had been leading by almost 40 seconds at one point, and it's likely that he was just trying to prevent his car from going through any unnecessary stress before the end of the race. After all, this was only a few races after he famously had to win a race with a broken gearbox, and the last thing he needed was a repeat of that episode. And then he repassed Moreno. Interesting. Eventually, Ayrton Senna came through to win the Monaco Grand Prix for the 4th time. He had led every lap, he had lapped everyone but the podium, and his winning margin was 18 seconds, a truly dominant performance. 2nd place was Nigel Mansell, 3rd was Jean Alesi, and the rest of the points went to Roberto Moreno, Alain Prost, and then Emanuele Pirro picked up a point for the 2nd and last time in his short F1 career. 12 cars finished in total, a surprisingly high tally for Monaco in the 90s. Funnily enough, McLaren didn't see the checkered flag and instructed Senna to do another lap because they weren't sure that the race had finished. It had. Guys, before I give this race a score, I want to let you know that I have a Daily Motion account for all the races that get taken down from my YouTube channel by the pesky FOM bots. Due to the high levels of parody, review and education my videos contain, as well as the short lengths of the clips I use, I believe that all of my videos fall under fair use, but sadly this isn't always enough. On my Daily Motion account, you can find the 1996 Monaco and Portuguese Grand Prix, as well as any other video that may end up being taken down from my YouTube channel. The link is in the description. Thank you. I gave the Grand Prix a 5 out of 10 overall, because in all honesty it was quite average, with Senna running away up at the front and no real midfield battles to speak of. It was carried somewhat by the drama that was the race for 2nd place between Modena, Patrese, Prost and Mansell, but even that wasn't enough to bring my unpredictability score up too high. The 6 for championship implications comes courtesy of the fight for second as well, as Berger's crash meant that Prost took second place in the championship fight, and Mansell was also able to move up to joint 4th as he finished the race for the first time that season. I was going to give this race a bonus point for the pleasure of watching a legend like Senna in his element, but to be honest I think that's cancelled out by the lack of pit stops making this race too straightforward. Sorry. I'll give the Driver of the Day award for Best Driver to Ayrton Senna for his utter dominance, although Boutsen, Gachot, Bernard and Coma all deserve honourable mentions for gaining handfuls of positions just by lasting while others fell by the wayside. I'll give the Inouye Trophy for Worst Driver to Senna's teammate Berger, who crashed twice in 10 laps. Drive safely guys, and I'll see you next time.